For this lesson, we are going to be talking about medical test results or test results in general, and whether they are positive or negative and what that means, and whether the results are true or false results and what that means. So in general, if I am doing some sort of test, specifically testing the human body, I can be testing for the presence of some disease or virus. Like I could be testing for whether this person has cancer, whether they have coronavirus, whether they have something, or I could be testing for whether a drug is present in the system, right? Whether that be some sort of blood alcohol content, right? I could be testing to see if there's alcohol in the system. I could be testing to see if aspirin remains in the system and how long aspirin remains in the system. So that is what it means to be doing some sort of test, and positive result means that the drug or disease or whatever is in the system. The test is saying, yes, you still have aspirin in your system, or unfortunately, right, yes, you have this disease. And a negative result means that the drug or disease or whatever we're testing for is not in the system. So remember here, positive necessarily does not necessarily mean good, right? Positive could be bad if I'm testing positive for some sort of illness, and negative could be good. So remember, we're not thinking in terms of those colloquial understandings of the words positive and negative. And then for true or false, true just means that the results, whether the results were positive or negative, true means that the results were accurate, and false means that the results were inaccurate. So we usually don't know for sure whether the results of a test are accurate or inaccurate. So that is unfortunately a drawback here, but those are the concepts. Positive means that a drug or disease is in the system, and negative means that the drug or disease is not in the system according to the test. True results are accurate results. False results are inaccurate results. So let's try computing positives, negatives, true, and false. So for this example, we have a pre-employment drug screening at Wonderful Awesome Business Corporation. And the first thing we want to know is how many people got this pre-employment drug screening, right? I'm going to ask about false positives, true positives, false negatives, true negatives. But the first thing I need to know is the size of the sample space. How many people got this drug test? So what I want to do is, well, I have 43 people who used the drug and got a positive test result. So that's 43 right there. And 88 people who did not use the drug and got a positive test result. All right, so I could draw all over this all day, or we can just add it up. How many people do we have? So we have 43 plus 7 plus 88, 43, 7, 88, 862. Okay. So when I add that up, 43 plus 7 plus 88 plus 862, it turns out, quite conveniently, that there are 1,000 applicants surveyed, or tested, I guess. Screened. Here we go. 1,000 applicants screened. So that's going to be important. And now let's take a look at answering some of these questions. So the first thing we want to know is find the probability of a false positive. So I'm just going to write it over here, size of sample space, and that was 1,000. Okay, So the size of the sample space is 1,000 applicants. And first thing I want is the probability of a false positive. And that means that they tested positive, but there was no drug use. That's because it's false. So starters, let's do positive. So here are my positive test results. And remember, positive test results says that the person does have the drug, whatever it is, in their system. And then since we want the probability of a false positive, we need to know what would make that false. Well, here are my people who do not use drugs, people who do use drugs, and they both got a positive test result. So which one of these is going to give a false result? Well, if I don't use drugs, but the test says there's drugs in my system, that would be these guys, and that would be false. So the probability of a false positive is 88 out of 1,000. And for the purposes of this video, we can turn these into decimals, but for the purposes of this video, we'll just go ahead and leave them as fractions for now. Okay, so the probability of a false positive tested positive but no drug use, 88 out of 1,000. And how about the probability of a true positive? How many people actually tested positive and that was true? That's going to be these people here. They still had a positive test result. That's still that red here. But in particular, I'm looking for people that result was true. Those people actually did have drugs in their system, whatever that drug was. And that is these. This is a positive that is true because the subject does use drugs. So that is a true positive. So that is 43 people tested positive and had drugs in their system out of 1,000. Now, let's find the probability of a false negative. Okay, now we're looking at negatives. So negatives are going to be over here. Negative test results. False would mean that if I get a true negative, that means that there's no drugs in my system and the test says there's no drugs in my system. So true is when the actual event and the test itself agree. So let's go ahead and we'll just do true negative first. Why not? So true negative is when I don't use drugs and the test says that I don't use drugs. So that's going to be 862 out of 1,000. So we kind of skipped around. Let's skip back. How about a false negative? Obviously, we're still in the negatives. But now this result needs to be false. Negative says they didn't have the drug in their system. In order for that to be false, the subject would have to use drugs. So that would be these 7 individuals. So for a false negative, that is 7 out of 1,000. So hopefully this gives you an idea of how to read probability charts. Remember that when we're doing medical tests, usually we don't have this information. We don't know whether a positive is a true positive or a false positive. So when you get a test, doctors may tell you, hey, the probability of a false positive is this, and that's what it's talking about. The important thing here is that you know how to read a chart and find the probabilities of true and false, positives and negatives.